the proudest day of my military career, became the most painful moment of my life. Because the people I wanted beside me chose to walk away. My father looked me in the eyes and said, "We'll never stand with you." I thought I'd lost my family forever. But exactly 1 hour later, my phone lit up with 49 missed calls, and what happened next changed all of us in a way I never imagined. "We will never stand next to you. You week of gunpowder, blood, and filthy sweat. You are the disgrace of this family." Those were the last words my biological father hissed in my face, just hours before I stepped up to the podium to receive the Silver Star. Standing at rigid attention in front of dozens of generals, my chest tightened as I looked down at the VIP row, empty. My parents had thrown away the Pentagon's gold-foiled invitation to go to the most expensive restaurant in the city to celebrate my sister's cosmetic endorsement deal, but the people sneering at me from that fancier restaurant had no idea. I had given that empty chair to a very special guest, and in exactly 3 minutes on live national television, the 4-star general was going to hand a massive life-changing reward to the exact person sitting in the seat they had just arrogantly rejected. Exactly 1 hour later, my phone screen was flashing relentlessly in the dark cab of my truck. 49 missed calls, dozens of frantic text messages. Before I tell you exactly what went down, take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. But only do it if this story hits close to home for you. And let me know in the comments where are you watching from, and what time is it right now. My thumb slid across the cracked glass, pressing down hard on the mute button. The blinding glare of the 49 missed calls from Robert and Evelyn vanished. The dark, heavy silence of the truck cab swallowed me whole again. I kept my hands at 10 and 2 staring dead ahead at the leather steering wheel. I didn't blink. I didn't cry. They were losing their minds right now. I could practically hear the panic through the unread texts, screaming about their rights, screaming about what they felt entitled to. But their little meltdown tonight was absolute garbage compared to the 5 years of hell I swallowed whole in the Middle East. For half a decade, a mud-flooded trench and razor wire in Syria was my only permanent address. I used my 70-lb Kevlar plate carrier as a blanket. My 20s didn't have casual weekend strolls, iced coffees, or birthday cakes. Just the deafening chest-rattling crack of AK-47 fire punching through my eardrums at 2 in the morning. My tactical assault pack was permanently stained brown, stuffed to the zipper with combat gauze, cat tourniquets, and auto-inject morphine. I chewed on dry cardboard tasting MRAs in the dirt, my eyes glued to thermal optics just to keep my unit breathing for one more sunrise. My entire world shrank down to a very simple, brutal math, dragging bleeding Americans out of the kill zone before they bled out. I earned a severe case of PTSD for my troubles. The kind that leaves you waking up with cold sweat soaking your sheets every time you force your eyes shut. The kind that makes you scan every rooftop when you walk out of a grocery store back stateside. Yet out there in the absolute dead center of a war zone, whenever that rare satellite phone actually caught a signal and rang the voices of Robert and Evelyn, never held a single ounce of human concern. Not once. They never asked if I was in one piece. Never asked if I had all my limbs attached, or if I had lost anybody in my squad that week. Every single call started and ended with a financial directive. I remember one specific call that the desert air smelled heavily of copper and diesel fuel. We had just lost a Humvee to an IED. My hands were still shaking, literally coated in dried blood when the comms tech handed me the heavy plastic receiver. "It's your mother," he said quietly. I pressed the phone to my ear, praying for a soft voice. Just one normal grounding moment from home. "Caitlin, the transfer didn't go through." That was her greeting. No hello, no asking if I was safe. Just a sharp, annoyed bark about a banking error. "Chloe has a networking brunch tomorrow and your card was declined. Fix it immediately." I stood there looking down at my boots caked in mud and blood. I muttered a weak apology, told her I'd contact military finance and hung up. Then I walked right back into the triage tent. They didn't ask, they ordered. Before my boots even hit the sand on my first deployment, my parents practically cornered me into setting up my military MyA portal. Every dime of my hazard pay, my massive re-enlistment bonus, all of it rigged to automatically wire straight into their joint bank account. The money I earned by dodging mortar shrapnel was casually withdrawn to consign a luxury downtown apartment lease for Chloe. Chloe the Golden Child, a 24-year-old freelance content creator who didn't know the smell of burnt cordite from a cheap candle. A girl who threw tantrums if her oat milk latte was made wrong. She was living in a high-rise skyline suite built entirely on my survival. I remember sitting alone on Christmas Eve, shivering in a concrete bunker. wiping gun grace off my hands just to punch a digital confirmation code to clear her rent check. It didn't stop at the rent. It never does with parasites. They bullied me into carrying her monthly membership dues for some elite VIP influencer club. In the warped entitled brains of Robert and Evelyn, I wasn't a daughter, I was a human ATM, an offshore gold mine established strictly to fund Chloe's fake internet lifestyle. I was just the grunt taking bullets so she could post pictures pretending she was self-made. And me, I was a pathetic fool desperate for biological love. I quietly tossed those blood-soaked paychecks through the electronic banking system month after month, year after year. I clung to this pathetic, desperate belief that my submission, my financial bleeding would eventually buy me a single sentence. Just one. We're proud of you, Caitlin. I was dead wrong. You can't buy respect from people who only see you as a walking wallet. But a human ATM only works until the screen shatters. You can only give away pieces of yourself before there is absolutely nothing left to take. For me, the final wake-up call didn't come in an envelope. It came on a scorching Tuesday afternoon, the day a piece of hot rebel shrapnel decided to tear right through my left bicep. A rope can only stretch so far before it snaps. For me, that breaking point arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. The air was thick with the smell of diesel exhaust, burnt cordite, and copper. We had just dragged ourselves back to the forward operating base after a brutal ambush just outside the wire. I was sitting on a rigid metal folding chair in the medical tent. A piece of rebel shrapnel had ripped a jagged path straight through my left bicep. The pain was a heavy throbbing pulse that radiated down to my fingertips. A field medic was standing over me, uncapping a bottle of rubbing alcohol. He poured it directly into the open gash. The chemical fire chewed through my raw muscle tissue, my jaw locked tight. I gripped the edge of the metal chair until my knuckles turned stark white, refusing to make a sound. While the medic shoved combat gauze into my arm to stop the bleeding, I pulled my phone out of my tactical vest with my good hand. I needed a distraction from the searing pain. I opened my banking app. I wanted to calculate if I had enough of a financial buffer to pay for some out-of-network physical therapy. When my deployment ended, the military doctors would patch the hole, but I knew I was going to need private rehab if I ever wanted full mobility back in that arm. The screen loaded. My checking account was hovering just inches above zero. Before I could even process the missing funds, the heavy satellite phone on the comms desk across the tent started to ring. The tech picked it up, listened for a second, and held it out to me. "It is for you," he said. I clamped my right hand over the bloody gauze on my left arm and walked over. I pressed the heavy plastic receiver to my ear. "Listen to me closely." It was Robert. No greeting, no asking how the mission went. Just a flat demanding bark. "You need to wire $2,000 to Chloe's account right now. Today, she has a high-tier networking event for Fashion Week coming up. She needs a new wardrobe and VIP access if she is going to secure brand deals." I stood there in the dim light of the medical tent. The smell of iodine in my own blood was heavy in my lungs. My combat boots were caked in dry mud. My arm was on fire, and my biological father was demanding $2,000 so my sister could sip champagne in a designer dress. For the very first time in my life, I felt the heavy chains of familial guilt completely shatter. "No," I said. My voice was a dead flat rasp, dead silence on the other end. "I took shrapnel to the arm an hour ago." I continued staring blankly at the canvas wall. "I am bleeding. I need whatever money is left for my own medical recovery. I am not sending a dime." The line crackled, then a sudden scuffle. Evelyn had snatched the phone out of his hand. When she spoke, her voice was not a mother's voice. It was a blade dipped in pure venom shoved right through the receiver. "How dare you be so selfish?" she shrieked. The speaker distorted under the volume of her rage. "You have to send that money, has a social media image to maintain. She's building a real career. What do you need money for out in the dirt?" I closed my eyes. The throbbing in my arms synced perfectly with my heartbeat. "I save lives, mother." She let out a short vicious laugh, a sound of pure disgust. "Your job is filthy," she hissed. "You just crawl around in the mud and the blood. Nobody even looks at you. Chloe is a model. She needs capital to navigate high society. Why do you even care about keeping money? It is not like you have a life to dress up for. You are just gonna get covered in dirt anyway." I did not yell back. I did not try to explain the value of pulling an 18-year-old kid out of a burning Humvee. You cannot explain the value of human life to a parasite. I pulled the phone away from my ear, reached out with a blood-stained finger, pressed the red button. The line went dead. I handed the phone back to the comms tech. walked back to the metal chair, and told the medic to finish stitching me up. Less than a month later, the brutal reality of their entitlement hit me right in the face. It was past midnight. The desert wind was howling outside the concrete walls of the bunker. The air was freezing. I sat alone on an ammo crate, my M4 rifle resting across my lap. I was scrolling through Instagram, letting the mindless feed keep me awake during Firewatch. A new photo popped up. Close account. She was standing in the center of a pristine paved driveway back in the States. She wore an expensive designer coat, a smug smile plastered across her face. In her hand, she held up a shiny set of keys. Parked right behind her was a brand new Mercedes G-Wagon. Flanking her on either side were Robert and Evelyn. They were smiling brightly, staring at the camera with overflowing pride. The caption read, "Hard work pays off. Blessed to have a family that supports my dreams." I stared at the blinding glare of the screen. Low 140,000 luxurious UV. I knew their financial situation. Robert was lazy. Evelyn spent whatever he brought in on keeping up appearances. There was absolutely no way they had the cash for that vehicle. My military intelligence training kicked in. I set my rifle aside. I logged into a secure public records database and pulled the recent credit monitoring alerts tied to my home address. It took me less than 3 minutes to find the paper trail. They had taken out a second mortgage. They had marched into a bank, handed over the deed to their house, and signed a massive home equity line of credit, a predatory loan with a sky-high interest rate. They had liquidated the equity of their own home and dumped every single penny of that toxic debt into a luxury vehicle just so Chloe could play the role of a rich influencer in front of her fake friends. And they did it with absolute confidence. Why? Because they assumed my automatic military allotments would cover the crushing monthly installments. They bet their house on my hazard pay. I sat alone in the dark, listening to the wind violently rattle the heavy steel door of the bunker. The cold seeped right through my boots. The last pathetic drop of biological loyalty I had left for those people evaporated into the freezing air. I did not shed a tear. I did not feel a single ounce of sorrow. I just woke up. I pulled up the Department of Defense My Pay portal on my phone. I stared at the list of active allotments, the automatic transfers that paid Chloe's downtown rent, the transfers that funded her VIP club, the transfers that fed Robert and Evelyn's joint account with the cold mechanical precision of an explosive ordnance tech defusing a bomb. I started tapping the screen. Cancel, cancel, cancel. I navigated to my personnel file. I opened the emergency beneficiary list. I highlighted Robert Watts and Evelyn Watts. Delete. I severed every single financial artery connecting me to that toxic house. I locked the system down, routing every dime of my combat pay into an encrypted high-yield savings account that only I could access. I turned off the phone screen. The bunker went pitch black. They had just signed a financial death warrant for a luxury car, and I had just cut the parachute. The lock on my bank account had barely registered in the system before my phone started vibrating violently against the metal ammo crate. Text after text lit up the dark bunker. Not questions, curses, vicious, frantic messages from Robert and Evelyn demanding to know why Chloe's rent check had bounced. I stared at the glowing screen as the notifications piled up. I let out a short hollow laugh. A cold smirk pulled at the corner of my mouth. I picked up the phone, tossed it into the very bottom of my tactical assault pack, and zipped it shut. I did not type a single letter back. All the rage, the betrayal, the suffocating injustice, I did not let it break me. I weaponized it. I strapped on my heavy Kevlar plate carrier. I grabbed my rifle. 10 minutes later, my unit rolled out on a massive hostage rescue operation. There was absolutely no room for hesitation. We hit the target compound just before dawn. Then all hell broke loose. It was an ambush. Insurgent machine gun fire tore through the mud walls, ripping the air apart with deafening cracks. Mortar rounds hammered the earth, sending shock waves straight through the soles of my combat boots. The ground shook so violently it rattled the fillings in my teeth. The air instantly turned into a thick choking fog of pulverized dirt, diesel fuel, and burnt cordite. Soldiers around me dropped into the dust. Instead of diving for cover, the iron in my blood boiled over. I dropped to my stomach and low-crawled through the kill zone. The rocky dirt scraped against my chin. Tracer rounds snapped the air just inches above my helmet, glowing like angry hornets. I ignored them. I locked my eyes on a downed infantryman 10 yards away. I reached out, grabbed the heavy nylon drag handle on the back of his vest, and hauled him backward with every ounce of strength I had. My muscles screamed in protest. The shrapnel wound in my left arm burned like pure acid. I did not stop. I operated with the cold, ruthless speed of a machine. I ripped open combat shirts. I jammed cat tourniquets high and tight on blown-out limbs, twisting the windlass until the bleeding stopped. I packed chest seals over sucking wounds while enemy crossfire chewed up the dirt right next to my knees. I fought the Reaper hand-to-hand for 4 straight hours. I dragged 12 bleeding American soldiers out of the line of fire that day. 12 lives ripped right out of the jaws of death. Later that evening, sitting in the back of a rumbling medevac chopper, covered in the drying blood of strangers, something inside my chest finally settled. I looked down at the surviving men breathing on the metal floor of the bird. I watched the chest of a 19-year-old kid rise and fall. He was missing 2 fingers, but he was breathing. I realized in that exact moment that I did not need a cheap hollow validation from a mother who called me dirty. The steady pulse in the veins of those 12 men was the only validation I would ever need. My existence was justified by the lives I kept in this world. 4 days later, I received orders to return stateside. My unit commander had personally bypassed the standard chain of command. He submitted my file directly to the highest levels of the Department of Defense. I stood alone in the massive sun-baked parking lot of the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. The city air was heavy and humid. In my right hand, I held a thick, heavy envelope. The paper was textured and expensive. It had a raised gold-foiled seal pressed into the center. It was a VP invitation. Inside were 2 front-row tickets reserved strictly for immediate family members. I looked down at the gold seal. I was about to be awarded the Silver Star. The United States military was going to honor me on live national television. I had the power to give my parents the ultimate front-row seat to their daughter's highest achievement. But this was not an olive branch. This was a test. A final absolute test to see if blood was actually thicker than water. I needed to see if they could put down the luxury bags, the vanity, and the social media clout for just one night to watch me stand on a stage I had bled to reach. I drove my rental car out to the familiar suburban neighborhood. I parked in the driveway. The engine clicked off, leaving a dead heavy silence. I stepped out into the crisp air. My heavy combat boots hit the cold concrete steps of the front porch. I pushed the heavy oak door open and walked inside. The house smelled like expensive vanilla diffusers and stale takeout. Robert and Evelyn were sprawled on the living room sofa. Their eyes were glued to a reality show on the massive flat-screen TV. Women on the screen were screaming at each other holding wine glasses. The stark contrast between my world of brutal survival and their world of manufactured drama made my stomach turn. I had been deployed in a combat zone for years. I'd almost died 3 days ago. Neither of them even turned their heads at the sound of the front door opening. I walked straight into the center of the room. I kept my spine rigid, shoulders squared back in the perfect unyielding posture of a military officer. I stopped right in front of the glass coffee table. I did not say hello. I did not wait for them to acknowledge my presence. I raised my right hand and slammed the heavy gold-foiled envelope down onto the glass. The sharp smack echoed loudly through the room, cutting right through the noise of the television. Robert flinched, startled. Evelyn finally looked up from the screen, a deep scowl of irritation crossing her face. "The Department of Defense is awarding me the Silver Star," I said. My voice was completely flat. I pointed a single steady finger at the gold seal on the table. "I want you in those VIP seats to watch." The heavy gold-foiled envelope hit the glass coffee table with a sharp cracking thud. The sound cut right through the obnoxious yelling coming from the reality TV show blaring on the 7-inch screen. For a split second, the living room went completely still. The overpowering smell of cheap vanilla plug-in air fresheners made the air feel thick and suffocating. I stood dead center in the room. My boots were planted shoulder-width apart. My spine was a steel rod. My hands were clasped loosely behind my back in a perfect parade rest. Robert groaned. He shifted his heavy weight on the expensive leather sofa. Annoyed that I had broken his trance, he leaned forward, reaching out with a lazy hand. His thick fingers grabbed the thick cardstock of the Department of Defense invitation. He flipped it open. His eyes tracked across the raised gold lettering. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. He let out a loud wet snort. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the invitation back. The envelope slid across the smooth glass surface, stopping right at the edge of the table. It hung there, teetering over the abyss. He did not look at my left arm, which was currently wrapped in thick medical gauze under my jacket. He did not ask why I was back stateside early. "I am not wasting my Friday night," Robert grunted, crossing his arms over his protruding stomach, sitting in some stuffy auditorium for 3 hours, just to watch a boring military parade with a bunch of grunts. It is a complete waste of time. You guys just hand those little medals out to everyone now to boost morale, don't you? He yawned. A literal open-mouthed yawn in the face of the silver star. I did not flinch. I kept my eyes locked on him, my facial muscles completely frozen. I was analyzing him the exact same way I would analyze a hostile threat in a combat zone. Your father is right, Evelyn chimed in. She did not even bother to look up. Her eyes were glued to the blinding screen of her iPhone. The rapid, annoying tapping of her acrylic nails against the glass filled the room. The glow of the screen highlighted the tight, heavily botoxed lines around her mouth. Besides, our schedule is completely booked, she said, her tone dripping with supreme annoyance. I just spent the last 45 minutes pulling strings to get us a VIP table at the Continental for Friday night. Do you know how hard it is to get a reservation there on a weekend? The Continental, the most obnoxiously expensive fine dining establishment in the downtown district, a place where people paid $1,000 for a steak just so they could tag the location on their social media. Why, I asked. My voice was completely flat, dead of all emotion. Evelyn finally looked up. Her eyes were wide, flashing with a manic manufactured pride that made my stomach turn. Because as Chloe just signed her first major brand deal, she announced, beaming as if she were talking about a Nobel Prize. A boutique leather company is sending her a limited edition handbag to feature on her page. Do you know how hard she has worked for this? The networking, the photo shoots. She is finally getting the recognition she deserves in the industry. We are taking her out to celebrate. I stood there in the dead quiet of the living room, letting my brain process the raw, unfiltered data she had just handed me. 12 American soldiers pulled from the blood-soaked dirt, shrapnel tearing through my own flesh, the smell of burning diesel and copper, a silver star directly from the Pentagon. And they were skipping it for a handbag. A leather purse for a 24-year-old girl who threw a tantrum if the Wi-Fi dropped out. The sheer towering absurdity of it was so heavy it almost crushed the oxygen out of the room. I did not move. I did not ask if they understood what a silver star actually meant. I did not mention the blood, the terror, or the lives I had kept breathing. You cannot explain the ocean to a puddle. Evelyn took my silence as an insult. Her face hardened. The fake plastic pride morphed instantly into pure unadulterated disgust. She dropped her phone onto her lap. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing into cold, hateful slits. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my combat boots and my tactical jacket. She took a breath and delivered the fatal blow. We have reservations at the Continental. We will never stand next to you. You have gunpowder blood and filthy sweat. You are the disgrace of this family. The words hung in the air, dripping with venom. The reality show on the television kept playing some woman screaming at a bartender in the background. But in this living room, the silence was absolute. If there was any lingering shred of hope left in my chest for these people, that single sentence killed it instantly. The anger evaporated. The hurt vanished. The desperate, pathetic need for a mother's love was completely burned away. What replaced it was an ice-cold steel-plated realization. They were not my family. They were parasites. And you do not negotiate with parasites. You exterminate them from your environment. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I just looked down at the hollow shells of human beings sitting on that expensive couch. Enjoy your dinner, I said. Every syllable was crisp, sharp, and brutally hollow. I will never bother this house again. I did not wait for a reaction. I did not give them the satisfaction of a screaming match. I turned on my heel. My boots hit the hardwood floor with heavy rhythmic thuds. I walked straight out the front door into the freezing night air. I grabbed the heavy brass handle and pulled the heavy oak door shut behind me. Slam. I slid my key into the deadbolt and turned it. Click. I walked down the concrete steps, the cold air biting at my face. I climbed into the driver's seat of my truck, threw it into gear, and hit the gas. The tail lights faded into the black suburban streets. I had just pulled the pin on a grenade, and I was not sticking around to watch the blast. I had a real family to assemble. The diner smelled like stale grease, industrial bleach, and burnt coffee. It was barely 600 in the morning. The sun was still fighting its way through the gray, overcast sky. I sat in a cracked vinyl booth, staring at the chipped ceramic mug in front of me. Across the sticky Formica table sat Sergeant First Class Maya Reyes. Maya and I had done 2 tours together. She was a logistics specialist. She had a jagged scar running down her jawline, and a brain that processed problems like a supercomputer. I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out the gold foil envelope from the Department of Defense. I slid it across the table. They passed, I said. My voice was completely flat. I delivered the news exactly like I would deliver a casualty report in the field. The seat is empty. Maya picked up the thick cardstock. She didn't offer a sympathetic head tilt. She didn't reach across the table to pat my hand. She was a soldier. She knew pity was useless. Their loss, Maya said, her voice a low gravel. She tossed the envelope back onto the table. But we are not leaving a hole in your formation. We need a real body in that VIP chair. Someone who actually earned the right to watch you take that medal. She unzipped her canvas assault pack and pulled out a heavy Panasonic Toughbook. The military laptop hit the table with a solid thud. She flipped the screen open, her fingers instantly flying across the keyboard. While Maya hacked through logistics, I pulled out my phone. I scrolled past the blocked numbers of my parents and found the contact I needed. Martha Sullivan. Martha was Evelyn's older sister. But they were absolutely nothing alike. While my mother spent her life chasing country club memberships and designer labels, Martha spent 30 years as a trauma nurse at a Veterans Affairs hospital. She spent her life pulling shrapnel out of kids and holding the hands of dying men. When I was freezing in a Syrian trench, it was never Evelyn who checked on me. It was Martha. Every single month, like clockwork, a heavy cardboard care package arrived at the forward operating base. Inside, I never found useless trinkets. I found vacuum-sealed combat goes, heavy-duty wool socks, and cheap tin boxes of shortbread cookies. She never asked me for a single dime. She just sent survival gear and love. I hit dial. 2 rings. Caddy. Martha's voice came through the speaker, raspy and warm. In the background, I could hear the hum of a washing machine. Aunt Martha, I need a favor, I said, keeping my tone steady. I have a VP ticket for a ceremony at the Pentagon this Friday. I need you on a plane to Washington. There was no hesitation, no asking about flight costs, no complaining about her schedule. I don't give a damn about the brass, Katie, Martha said, her voice cracking just a fraction. I just want to see you with my own 2 eyes. Tell me when to be at the airport. A massive suffocating weight dropped off my chest. I looked across the table at Maya. She was already holding up her personal American Express card, reading the numbers into a rushed online checkout form. Flight is booked, Maya muttered, not looking away from the screen. And I just expedited a formal evening gown from a boutique in Georgetown. It will be at your apartment by noon tomorrow. 24 hours later, I pulled my truck up to the arrivals curb at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. The smell of raw jet fuel and exhaust fumes filled the humid air. The automatic sliding glass doors parted. Martha walked out. She was wearing a simple wool coat. In her right hand, she dragged a small, heavily scuffed Samsonite suitcase. It was a cheap, beat-up piece of luggage. It looked like garbage compared to the thousands of dollars of designer leather my mother and sister paraded around with. But to me, that scuffed suitcase was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I put the truck in park and stepped out. Martha dropped the suitcase right on the concrete. She closed the distance and wrapped her arms around my shoulders. The hug was bone-crushing. She smelled like peppermint and clean laundry detergent. She pulled back just enough to look at me. Her calloused, aging fingers reached up and gently traced the edge of the tactical jacket covering my left bicep. She knew about the shrapnel. She was a VA nurse. She knew exactly what a bullet did to human tissue. Her eyes went red, welling up with tears. But she did not break down. "You're still standing," she whispered. "I'm still standing," I confirmed. We drove back to my apartment. When we walked inside, the navy blue evening gown Maya had ordered was hanging perfectly on the closet door frame. The material was soft, heavy, and immaculate. That evening, the 3 of us sat in my living room. The contrast between this room and my parents' house was jarring. There was no reality TV screaming from a flat screen. There was no frantic panic over a bounced rent check. Nobody was demanding a cash transfer to maintain a fake internet lifestyle. There was just the low, quiet hum of the refrigerator. Martha sat on the couch with a cup of black tea. She didn't talk about herself. She just listened. She looked me dead in the eye while I told her about the ambush. I told her about the dust, the noise, and the heavy weight of the men I pulled out of the kill zone. She understood the cost of the Silver Star. She understood that the medal was forged in blood. I looked at Maya leaning against the kitchen counter sipping a beer. I looked at Martha sitting on my couch. This was the truth. Family is not a faulty string of DNA. Family is not the people who demand a cut of your paycheck when you are bleeding in the dirt. Family is the people who lock shields with you when the mortar rounds start falling. The forces were assembled. The logistics were locked in. I stood up from the armchair and looked at the clock on the wall. It was time. I grabbed the garment bag, pulled the heavy brass zipper shut, and walked toward the door. At exactly 7:80 p.m., the massive oak doors of the Pentagon Auditorium slammed shut. The heavy thud echoed like a gunshot sealing the room. Hundreds of four-star generals, high-ranking defense officials, and the National Press Corps packed the velvet seats. The air smelled of brass polish, starched wool, and ozone from the heavy lighting rigs. The giant crystal chandeliers overhead dimmed to a low glow. At the back of the room, a row of red tally lights on the network broadcast cameras snapped on. We were live across the entire country. The atmosphere in the room was incredibly heavy, stifling. General Thomas Vance stepped up to the wooden podium. 4 heavy silver stars dug into the shoulders of his dress uniform. He did not smile. He did not wave to the crowd. He gripped the edges of the podium with thick, scarred hands and adjusted the microphone. He did not waste a single breath on a polite introduction. He went straight to the blood, the dirt, and the ugly reality of combat. His voice boomed through the amplified speakers, rattling the floorboards. He painted a brutal, unforgiving picture of the Middle East. He did not use sanitized political buzzwords. He talked about the suffocating heat, the smell of burning diesel and copper, the sudden deafening crack of a rebel ambush tearing through a quiet morning. Then he said my name. General Vance read the official combat report out loud to the entire nation. He detailed exactly how the enemy mortar fire ripped our defensive line apart. He described me low-crawling through a kill zone, taking hot shrapnel to the bicep and refusing medical evacuation. He told the silent room how I hauled 12 bleeding American soldiers out of the crossfire, packing their chest wounds in the dirt while tracer rounds snapped inches over my Kevlar helmet. While my mother was likely sitting at a candle-lit table at the Continental, sipping expensive wine and complaining about the service, a 4-star general was telling the world exactly how much blood I had to lose to keep 12 men breathing. The auditorium exploded. It started as a low rumble and erupted into thousands of hands clapping like rolling thunder. Every single officer in the room snapped to attention. Hundreds of right hands raised in a rigid silent salute. The civilian press corps scrambled to their feet. I stood up. I kept my chin parallel to the floor, my eyes locked dead ahead. My face was a mask of absolute discipline. I marched up the carpeted stairs to the stage. My boots hit the wooden planks with heavy measured steps. General Vance stepped away from the podium. He walked right up to me. He held the silver star in his hand. His rough, calloused fingers pinned the medal to the left breast of my dress uniform. The medal felt ice-cold against the fabric. It was a tiny piece of metal, but it carried the suffocating weight of 12 human lives. I snapped a sharp salute. Vance returned it. I executed a crisp about-face. I stared out at the blinding sea of flashing cameras and gold-braided uniforms. I walked back down the stairs, completely composed. I took my seat in the front row next to Aunt Martha. Our shoulders brushed. I let out a slow, quiet breath and offered her a small smirk. Upon the stage, General Vance returned to the microphone. He raised a single flat hand into the air. The applause died instantly. The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop on the thick carpet. Honoring the soldier in the dirt is only half of our duty, Vance announced. His voice echoed off the high walls, hard and unyielding. The Department of Defense has just authorized a brand new unprecedented national initiative. Tonight on live television, we are officially launching the Homeland Support Fund. He gripped the podium again. He looked directly into the main broadcast camera, his eyes burning with intensity. A soldier cannot hold the line without a rock-solid rear guard, Vance continued. The people who quietly send the medical supplies, the letters, the silent prayers. The family members who never ask for a dime, but give absolutely everything they have to keep our troops grounded. True family is not just a bloodline. It is the people who carry the weight when the uniform gets too heavy. Today we give them the ultimate recognition. Right now, as General Vance stood on that stage, I knew exactly who was watching this broadcast on the giant flat screen at that fancy restaurant. If you have ever been treated like a walking ATM by the people who were supposed to love you, hit the like button and subscribe right now. Drop a standing strong in the comments below so I know I am not alone in this fight. General Vance opened a black leather folder on the podium. He flipped to the first page. The silence in the auditorium stretched out, pulled so tight it felt like a piano wire ready to snap. He leaned closer to the microphone. He was about to announce the very first recipient of a multi-million-dollar national fund. General Vance opened the heavy black leather folder. The Department of Defense logo was pressed deep into the cover. He leaned half an inch closer to the microphone. The inaugural recipient of the Homerant Support Fund, his voice dropped to a low booming gravel, is Martha Sullivan. Next to me, Martha turned to stone, her brain completely flatlined. She stopped breathing. She just sat there in the front row staring blankly at the 4-star general standing 20 feet away. In a fraction of a second, the heavy television cameras mounted on hydraulic tripods whipped around. The blinding white beam of a massive spotlight cut straight through the darkened auditorium, pinning us to our seats. On the giant digital jumbotron hanging above the stage, Martha's face appeared in high definition. She looked terrified, utterly bewildered, and completely out of her depth. Tears were already pooling in the deep wrinkles around her eyes. I looked at the giant screen and a very slow, very deliberate smirk pulled at the corner of my mouth. I reached over, grabbed Martha's callous hand and gently pulled her to her feet. Up on the stage, a high-ranking adjutant marched out from the wings. He carried a large, heavy document encased in thick cherry wood and glass. General Vance took it, holding it firmly by the edges. He looked back at the microphone. He did not summarize the reward. He read every single word of the legal decree out loud to the entire country. Effective immediately by order of the Department of Defense, we officially grant Martha Sullivan the lifetime deeds to a lakefront residential property. Vance's voice cut through the silence like a battle axe. This property is fully subsidized. The fund will cover 100% of all property taxes and maintenance fees for the duration of her life. Martha sighed on her feet. She gripped my forearm, her nails digging into the fabric of my dress uniform. Vance wasn't finished. Furthermore, he continued, the fund hereby provides a fully funded top-tier IP Medicare package granting unlimited access to the nation's premier medical facilities. And finally, an all-expenses-paid first-class tour across Europe. For 30 years of selfless service to our veterans at the VA, and for holding the line when our soldiers needed it most. A multi-million-dollar package handed out on live television. It was the absolute peak of the American dream. Financial freedom, a house with no taxes. Premium health care that most citizens spent their entire lives bankrupting themselves to afford. And every single ounce of that unimaginable wealth was just handed to a retired nurse. A woman who lived in a cramped apartment. A woman whose only investment in my life was sending cheap tins of shortbread cookies and medical gauze to a mud trench in Syria. I put my hand on the small of her back. I guided her forward. We walked up the red-carpeted steps to the center of the stage. The auditorium erupted again. A deafening physical wall of applause crashed over us. The noise was absolute. Flash bulbs from the press pool fired off in rapid succession, turning the room into a chaotic strobe light. Tears were streaming freely down Martha's face now. She reached the center of the stage. General Vance stepped forward. He did not salute her. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of profound raw respect. He grabbed her right hand, shook it hard, and handed over the heavy cherry wood frame. Martha stood there clutching the wooden frame tight against her chest like it was a shield. The camera flashes bounced off the glass. I stood in the front row clapping hard. My posture was rigid. My face was a mask of stoic pride. But beneath my ribs, a massive electric wave of pure dark satisfaction was tearing through my bloodstream. I looked up at the jumbotron. I looked at the extreme close-up of Martha's tears-soaked glowing face. And I knew with absolute mathematical certainty. I knew exactly where Robert, Evelyn, and Chloe were at this exact second. They were sitting in the low-lit, pretentious dining room of the Continental. They were likely halfway through a 300 bottle of wine, celebrating a free leather handbag. And mounted right above the expensive mahogany bar in that restaurant was a massive flat-screen television. I knew they were watching. I knew the broadcast networks had been advertising this Pentagon ceremony all week. I knew that somewhere in that fancy restaurant Robert had looked up from his expensive steak. I knew Evelyn had dropped her iPhone. I knew Chloe's jaw had unhinged. They were sitting in a restaurant they could not afford, drowning in high-interest debt from a predatory loan they took out on a luxury SUV. They had bet their entire financial future on my combat pay. They had called me filthy. They had called me a disgrace. And now they were being forced to watch the United States military hand millions of dollars in real estate, healthcare, and luxury travel to the sister they despised. They were watching Martha Sullivan get handed the exact upper-class lifestyle they had spent their entire pathetic lives trying to fake. It was a nuclear strike delivered across the airwaves. I stopped clapping. I lowered my hands. The heavy brass keys in my pocket pressed against my thigh. The ceremony was over, but the war had just breached the wire. It was almost 1100 at night when the ceremony officially ended. I walked Martha out to my truck. She was still clutching the heavy cherrywood frame against her chest like a lifeline. She had barely spoken a word since we left the stage. The sheer magnitude of the real estate and healthcare package had put her in a state of quiet shock. I climbed into the driver's seat. I pushed the heavy ignition button. The truck engine roared to life. A split second later, the digital dashboard screen lit up. It synced with my phone via Bluetooth. The 8-inch screen instantly turned into a flashing red alarm panel. 49 missed calls. Dozens of unread text messages piled up, scrolling rapidly across the glass. Pick up the phone right now, Robert. How dare you give a house to that old hag Evelyn? You ruined my dinner. Call the general back, Chloe. They had seen the broadcast. The shock of watching millions of dollars slip through their fingers had instantly mutated into sheer rapid desperation. I looked at the glowing screen. I did not feel an ounce of stress. I reached out and pressed the physical mute button on the console. The frantic digital noise stopped. I put the truck in drive. I took my time driving at exactly the speed limit to drop Martha off at a high-end hotel in Georgetown. I made sure she was checked in safe and comfortable. Their panic was absolute garbage to me. Let them rot in it for a while. It was close to midnight when I finally pulled into the parking garage of my apartment building. I took the elevator up to my floor. The metal doors slid open. I stopped dead in my tracks. Standing right in the middle of the narrow carpeted hallway was a human barricade. Robert, Evelyn, and Chloe. They were completely blocking the path to my front door. It was a pathetic, absurd sight. Chloe was still wearing a tight, bright red evening gown, clutching that limited edition designer handbag she had bragged about. Her makeup was slightly smeared, her face contorted into an ugly, jealous scowl. Robert was pacing back and forth across the cheap hallway carpet like a caged animal. He was sweating heavily through his dress shirt. Evelyn stood dead center, staring at the elevator doors, her eyes wide with a manic, obsessive frenzy. They had abandoned their $1,000 dinner at the Continental. They had rushed across town in their dress clothes. They were trespassing in my building, lying in wait outside my door, not to congratulate me on the silver star, not to ask about my arm. They were here to steal a house. The second I stepped off the elevator, the ambush started. "Where the hell have you been?" Evelyn shrieked. Her voice bounced harshly off the low ceiling. She lunged forward, closing the distance. I did not flinch. I squared my shoulders, dropping into a wide balanced stance. "I was busy driving my guest to her hotel," I said. My voice was a low, steady rumble. Chloe pushed past her mother. She stomped toward me in high heels. She pointed a finger tipped with blood-red polish directly at my face. "You did this on purpose," Chloe screamed. Her voice was thin, reeking of entitlement. "You gave a lakefront mansion to that old woman just to embarrass me. You have the connections. Call that general right now. Call the Pentagon. Tell them you made a mistake and changed the name on the deed. That property belongs to this family." She stepped sideways, planting herself firmly in front of my deadbolt. She spread her arms wide, blocking the lock with her body. Robert stopped pacing. He took a heavy step toward me. "You listen to your sister," he growled. "You owe us that property. You owe this family." I stood in the hallway looking at the three of them. This was the absolute bottom of the barrel. A grown man trying to intimidate a combat veteran over a house he did not earn. A sister demanding I commit federal fraud to fund her fake Instagram life. I did not argue. I did not waste my breath trying to explain how the Department of Defense worked. You do not reason with a riot. You break it. I reached into my right pocket. I pulled out my heavy brass key ring. It made a sharp metallic clink. I stepped forward. I did not slow down. Chloe stood her ground, assuming I would stop. I didn't. I raised my right arm. Using the solid conditioned strength of a soldier, I drove the side of my forearm directly into her shoulder. I shoved her hard. Chloe gasped. She stumbled sideways, her high heels twisting on the carpet. She slammed shoulder first into the drywall, barely keeping her balance. "Don't you dare touch me," she screamed. I ignored her completely. I stepped up to the metal door. I shoved the key into the lock. Click. I twisted the handle and pushed the door open just a few inches. Then I stopped. I turned my body, planting myself solidly in the center of the door frame. I used my entire frame as a physical unmoving meat shield. I looked at Robert. I looked at Evelyn. I looked at the golden child picking herself up off the wall. "The Department of Defense contract is sealed," I said. The words hit the hallway like chunks of ice. "The ink is dry. There are no amendments. Nobody is changing the name on that deed." My words hit Robert like a physical blow. You could see the exact second his brain processed the cold, hard reality of military law. A multi-million-dollar estate was sitting right there, and he couldn't touch it. It was completely legally out of his reach. He lost his mind. His face turned an ugly mottled red. He ground his teeth together so hard I could hear the enamel scraping in the quiet hallway. He balled his right hand into a massive fist, pulled his arm back, and swung. Thud. He punched the hallway wall right next to my head. The cheap apartment drywall cracked inward. It made a hollow, pathetic sound. Dust sprinkled down onto the stained carpet. Violence works when you can bully someone into submission. But physical violence cannot punch through a Department of Defense contract. He pulled his fist back, breathing heavily, staring at the dent in the wall. His knuckles were scuffed and bleeding. He let out a loud garbled curse, turned his back, and stumbled down the hall toward the elevator. The first pillar of their little empire just collapsed. Seeing the brute force tactic fail, Evelyn pivoted instantly. It was actually sick to watch. The venomous rage on her face vanished in a fraction of a second. Her eyes welled up. Tears started pouring down her heavily powdered cheeks, leaving dark, messy tracks of mascara. She lunged forward. Before I could step back, she grabbed my left forearm. Her manicured fingers dug into my tactical jacket right over the fresh stitches from the shrapnel wound. A sharp spike of pain shot up to my shoulder. But I didn't wince. I just stared at her. "Caitlin, please," she sobbed. It sounded so rehearsed, so utterly fake. "You can't do this to us. We are your family. We are your blood. I gave birth to you. You are supposed to share your blessings with the people who raised you. We are family." I looked down at her hands gripping my sleeve. I felt the sticky, sweaty desperation in her grip. I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. 5 hours ago, I was a dirty, filthy disgrace who reek of blood. Now, because there was a massive financial asset on the table, I was her beloved blood again. I jerked my arm back hard. I ripped my jacket out of her grip, breaking the physical contact completely. She stumbled forward a half step, genuinely shocked that her manipulation didn't work. I brushed off my sleeve where she had touched me, keeping my eyes locked on hers. With Evelyn failing, Chloe took her turn. She stopped screeching about the deed and switched to her favorite role, the tiny helpless victim. She dropped her expensive designer handbag onto the cheap hallway floor. She buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook. She let out these loud theatrical sobs that echoed down the corridor. "You planned this?" she cried, her voice muffled behind her hands. "You did this on national TV just to humiliate me. My phone has been blowing up all night. My friends saw it. My sponsors saw it. You ruined my entire reputation tonight. You ruined my life. You need to apologize to me right now." I just stared at her. A 24-year-old woman in a tight red dress crying in a cheap apartment hallway, demanding an apology from a combat veteran because an old nurse got a house instead of her. Blame, crocodile tears, guilt trips. This was the exact toxic garbage they had used to bleed my bank accounts dry for 5 straight years. They would push me, insult me, and take my money. And the second I pushed back, they would cry and play the victim until I caved just to get some peace and quiet. Not tonight. Tonight I was breaking the loop. I locked eyes with Evelyn. Then I looked at Chloe. The hallway was completely silent except for Chloe's fake sniffling. "I accept this sudden apology from you both," I said. My voice was a low, dangerous gravel. Evelyn looked up, wiping her eyes. A brief flash of victory crossing her face. She thought I was caving. She thought the ATM was opening back up. But understand this. I continued, dropping the temperature in the hallway to freezing. I am only accepting it for my own peace. Do not get confused. Acceptance does not mean forgiveness, and there is absolutely zero chance of reconciliation. Evelyn's mouth dropped open. "Caitlin, I forbid you from ever asking me for money again," I said, cutting her off completely. "Your access to my life is permanently revoked." I didn't wait for the screaming to start again. I didn't wait for another fake tear to drop. I took one heavy step backward into my apartment. I grabbed the heavy brass door handle and pulled it shut with the conditioned strength of a soldier. Slam. The heavy wood hit the frame, cutting off whatever Evelyn was about to say. I twisted the deadbolt twice. Click, click. I slid the heavy metal security chain into place for good measure. I stood there in the dark entryway of my apartment. The silence inside was thick and heavy. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, closing my eyes. Through the thick barrier, I didn't hear any more yelling. The fight was gone. The fake tears had dried up the second the door closed. I just heard the heavy, defeated shuffling of leather shoes and high heels, dragging across the carpet, moving slowly toward the elevator. 4 months. That is exactly how long it took for reality to rip the doors off their fake empire without my combat pay, automatically dumping into their accounts on the first of the month. The financial hemorrhage was instant and brutal. Chloe maxed out 3 different credit cards in a matter of weeks, just trying to keep up her influencer charade. She tried to open new lines of credit to cover her Vibe Club fees. The banks took one look at her non-existent income and stamped them denied. Then came the overdue notices for the Mercedes G-Wagon. It happened on a Tuesday, high noon. A heavy-duty diesel tow truck rolled right up to the curb of her luxury downtown apartment complex. The driver threw the truck into reverse, the loud warning beeps echoing off the glass high-rises. He dropped the heavy steel fork, slid them right under the front tires of the SUV, and hooked the winch chains. The metal clanked loudly against the chassis. Chloe ran out of the lobby wearing a silk robe and fuzzy slippers, screaming at the top of her lungs. She demanded he drop the car. The repo guy in a dirty high-vis vest did not even look at her. He just handed her a clipboard with a repossession order and hit the hydraulic lift. The wagon went up in the air. The best part, half a dozen of her fake high society friends were standing right there on the sidewalk. They did not step in to help her. They just pulled out their phones and recorded her breakdown. Her entire plastic mask shattered right there on the concrete. Robert and Evelyn went into an absolute blind panic. They tried to reach me. They could not. I changed my number, blocked their emails, and blacklisted their names at the front gate of my military base. They knew better than to show up at my door again. If they tried to trespass on a federal installation, the military police would put them face down on the asphalt and drag them away in zip ties. They tried calling extended relatives to beg for loans. Every single one hung up on them. I'd already sent the entire family the screen recording of the Pentagon broadcast. Everyone knew exactly who they really were. With the predatory interest rate on the second mortgage eating them alive, Robert hit the panic button. He liquidated his entire 401k retirement portfolio. He swallowed the massive early withdrawal penalties, bleeding out tens of thousands of dollars in taxes just to try and cover Chloe's toxic debts. It was not enough. You cannot outrun a bad hillock. The bank initiated foreclosure. Robert and Evelyn had to sell the house for pennies on the dollar before the bank seized it. They packed 30 years of suburban entitlement into cheap cardboard boxes. They moved into a cramped, poorly insulated rental in a bad zip code on the outskirts of the city. Now they sit in a tiny living room, drowning in debt, forced to watch my career soar from a distance. My iron boundary did not just stop their abuse. It financially leveled them. Meanwhile, true loyalty paid off. Aunt Martha packed up her scuffed suitcase and moved into the lakefront estate. The property is completely flawless. Every morning, she sits on a massive cedar deck overlooking the glassy water, drinking black tea. She does not pay a single dime in property taxes or HOA fees. The Department of Defense covers it all. She carries a top-tier VIP Medicare card in her wallet. She never has to worry about a medical copay again. Just yesterday, she finalized the itinerary for a first-class flight to Rome. When I have a weekend pass, I drive out to the lake house. I walk through the front door and it smells like roasted chicken and fresh bread. We eat dinner on the deck. No screaming, no demands for cash, just the quiet, solid peace of a real home. My own career shifted gears. I'm no longer dodging mortars in the Syrian dirt. The brass at the Pentagon promoted me. I'm now a senior instructor at Fort Bragg. I spend my days out on the firing ranges. The Carolina sun beats down on the sand. The air smells like hot brass gun oil and packed dirt. I mold the next generation of special operations medics, teaching them how to pull bodies out of the line of fire. I stood on the range this morning watching my recruits run tactical drills. My phone buzzed in my heavy vest. I pulled it out. A text from Maya. You earned this piece. See you at the barbecue Sunday. I locked the screen and slid the phone back into my pocket. Looking back at the nightmare of my 20s, the truth is simple. Iron discipline and ruthless boundaries are not cruel. They are the absolute only way to protect your life from parasites hiding behind a shared bloodline. Family is not the people who demand a cut of your paycheck when you finally win the medal. Real family is the people who lock shields with you when you are bleeding in the mud. If you know the strength it takes to cut off toxic family, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you next.